My brother and his wife didn't invite me to their anniversary party, but my parents did. When I walked in, his wife's face went white. "You weren't supposed to be here," she hissed. I smiled, neither was this. I placed an envelope on the table, and suddenly, they were begging me to leave. I wasn't supposed to be at that party. And Julia knew it the second she saw me. Her smile froze mid-laugh, the color drained from her face, and for a split second, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then, just as quickly, she recovered, her perfectly practiced expression snapping back into place, though her fingers gripped the champagne flute just a little too tightly. "You weren't supposed to be here," she hissed under her breath, stepping toward me in her designer heels, trying to block me from the rest of the crowd. I smiled, slow and deliberate, before placing an envelope on the pristine white-clothed table beside us. Neither was this. That was when everything changed. But before I get to that, let me tell you how we got here. I hadn't spoken to my brother, Michael, in nearly 5 years. Not really, anyway. We used to be close, closer than close. Growing up, it was always the two of us against the world. Our parents weren't bad people, just detached. Dad worked too much, Mom focused on keeping up appearances, and Michael and I learned early on that if we wanted something, we had to rely on each other. And we did. For years. Then he met Julia. At first, I thought she was just another girlfriend. Pretty, put together, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She seemed polite enough, though something about her always felt calculated. Like every move she made was intentional, carefully measured for maximum effect. But Michael was in love, and I wanted to believe she made him happy. I ignored the warning signs. The subtle ways she'd steer conversations away from me whenever Michael and I talked. The accidental scheduling conflicts whenever I tried to visit. The times she'd insist, "Oh, Michael's just so busy lately." You know how it is, as if I hadn't known my own brother my entire life. Slowly, piece by piece, she pulled him away. And Michael, whether he realized it or not, let it happen. The final break came 5 years ago. I won't lie, it still stings to think about. There was a betrayal. A lie. A moment where I looked at my brother, the person who was supposed to have my back no matter what, and realized he had chosen Julia over me. After that, I stopped trying. I moved on. Built a life for myself. But some wounds never fully heal. So when my mother called, casually asking if I was coming to Michael and Julia's anniversary party, my first reaction was disbelief. "Anniversary party?" I repeated, gripping the phone tighter. "Yes, sweetheart. You know, their 10-year anniversary. It's a big celebration at the country club. We'd love to see you there." I let out a short laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was ridiculous. "Mom, I wasn't invited." There was a pause. Then, in that soft, careful voice she always used when trying to smooth things over, she said, "Oh, I'm sure it was just an oversight, honey. You know how busy Julia is with planning." An oversight. Right. I almost let it go. Almost. But something in me snapped. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was the years of being pushed aside, erased from my own brother's life. So I made a decision. I was going. And I wasn't going empty-handed. The country club was as over the top as I expected. White tablecloths, expensive floral arrangements, the works. The kind of event designed to impress people who spent their lives pretending to be impressed. I walked in unnoticed at first. But as I made my way further into the hall, heads started to turn. Some people recognized me, their expressions flickering with curiosity, confusion. Others just watched, sensing something was off but not quite sure what. Then Julia saw me. And that's where we started. "You weren't supposed to be here," she hissed, her voice low and urgent, eyes darting around the room as if making sure no one else heard. I smiled, slow and knowing. Neither was this. I placed the envelope on the table between us. For the first time in years, Julia looked genuinely rattled. Michael, still caught up in conversation with some guests, hadn't noticed me yet. But Julia had. And when she saw that envelope, she moved fast, reaching for it with a forced laugh. "Oh, I was quicker." My fingers pressed it down against the table, stopping her. "No rush," I said lightly. "I think Michael should see it first." Her smile twitched. "There's no need for drama," she murmured. I arched a brow. "Oh, I think there is." That was when Michael finally turned around. His gaze landed on me, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes, shock, maybe even a sliver of guilt. Then, his attention dropped to the envelope under my hand. "What's going on?" he asked. Julia stepped in quickly, placing a hand on his arm. "Nothing, sweetheart. I slid the envelope toward him. Go ahead, open it. Michael hesitated, looking between me and Julia. Then, slowly, he picked it up and pulled out the contents. Silence. I watched his face as he read. The initial confusion. The widening of his eyes. The way his fingers gripped the papers a little tighter with each passing second. Then, finally, the moment of realization. He looked up, and his voice was barely above a whisper. Where did you get this? Julia stiffened. Michael, don't listen to, where the hell did you get this? He demanded, cutting her off. I tilted my head. Let's just say not everyone in your life is as loyal to Julia as you think. His hands were shaking now. Is this real? Julia let out a nervous laugh. Oh my God, Michael, of course not. She's lying. She's always been jealous of us, you know that. I stayed silent. Because I didn't have to say a word. The truth was right there in his hands. Michael turned back to the papers. The betrayal was written all over his face. Julia panicked. Michael, don't do this. You're being ridiculous. You know I love you. Michael didn't look at her. He just exhaled, long and slow, before finally meeting my gaze. And for the first time in years, I saw my brother again. Not Julia's husband. Not the man who had pushed me away. Just Michael. My brother. Julia's voice turned desperate. Michael, he cut her off, his voice quiet but firm. I want you to leave. She stared. What? I want you to leave, Julia. The room went completely silent. And just like that, everything she had built, the life, the lies, the manipulation, came crashing down. Julia froze. For the first time since I'd met her, she had nothing to say. No quick excuse, no charming deflection, no well-placed tears to manipulate the situation in her favor. Just sheer, stunned silence. The room had gone deathly quiet. Even the band in the corner, which had been playing soft instrumental music, trailed off awkwardly. Guests murmured among themselves, watching the scene unfold like a slow-motion car crash. Michael, Julia finally said, her voice tight with barely concealed panic, we should talk about this in private. Michael didn't move. He was still staring at the papers in his hands, the weight of what he had just read sinking into his very bones. His jaw clenched, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, pieces of a puzzle snapping together, pieces he hadn't even realized were missing. I stayed silent. This wasn't my moment. It was his. Julia reached for his arm, her voice dropping to a whisper. Sweetheart, please, let's not make a scene. Michael flinched. And I knew right then that something in him had cracked. Because for years, Julia had controlled him with that exact tactic, making him believe that anything inconvenient, anything uncomfortable, anything true was simply making a scene. That standing up for himself, questioning her, pushing back, was embarrassing, that the only way to keep the peace was to let her have her way. But this time, she had pushed too far. Michael slowly lifted his head, and when he looked at her, there was something unfamiliar in his eyes. Something cold. His voice was calm. Deadly calm. How long? Julia blinked. What? He lifted the papers slightly, shaking them for emphasis. How long have you been lying to me? She let out another airy laugh, but it was weaker this time. Michael, you know she's just trying to cause trouble. This is what she does. How long? The laughter died in her throat. Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say something, but she couldn't find the right words. I could have answered for her. I knew exactly how long. But I didn't. I wanted to see if she had the guts to tell the truth. Michael waited. The silence stretched, pressing in on all sides. Then, Julia did something I hadn't expected. She sighed. Like she was exhausted. Like we were the ones being unreasonable. Then she rolled her shoulders back, and in a voice as smooth as glass, she said, Michael, do you really want to do this here? Oh, she still thought she could control this. I could practically see her calculating the next move. She wasn't apologizing because she knew that would be an admission of guilt. She wasn't denying it outright, either, because at this point, even she knew that was useless. Instead, she was shifting the blame. Not onto me this time, but onto Michael himself. Making him the unreasonable one for wanting answers. And for a second, a brief second, I saw the old Michael waver. The man who had spent years smoothing things over for Julia, excusing her behavior, brushing off his own doubts because it was easier to believe her than to confront the truth. But then, something changed. Maybe it was the weight of the evidence in his hands. Maybe it was the years of buried suspicions rising to the surface all at once. Maybe it was the collective whispers of the guests, or the way Julia was looking at him now, not with love, not with regret, but with cold calculation. Maybe, finally, he just saw her for what she really was. Michael exhaled sharply. Then, In a voice so steady it almost sounded like someone else's, he said, "Get out." Julia flinched. And suddenly, the whole room was holding its breath. "Michael," I said, "get out." There was no shouting. No grand, dramatic outburst. Just a finality in his voice that sent a chill through the air. Julia's eyes darted around, searching for an ally. But for the first time in her life, no one stepped in to help her. Not the guests. Not the friends she had curated so carefully over the years. Not even our parents, who were standing near the back, watching everything unfold with unreadable expressions. She was alone. I watched her throat tighten, her fingers clench into fists at her sides. Then she turned to me. And oh, the look she gave me, if looks could kill, I would have been dead on the spot. I smiled. Not because I was happy. Not because I was gloating. But because for the first time in years, the truth had finally won. Julia asked in a breath, then turned sharply on her heel and walked toward the exit, her movement stiff and controlled. Michael watched her go. And when the doors closed behind her, he let out a long, shaky breath, like he had been holding it in for years. The room remained silent. Then, slowly, almost cautiously, Michael turned to face me. There were 100 things I could have said in that moment. 100 things I wanted to say. But in the end, I only said one. "Are you okay?" Michael let out a dry, humorless chuckle. He ran a hand through his hair, still gripping the papers in his other hand. "I don't know," he admitted. And for the first time in years, my brother, the real Michael, was standing right in front of me again. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next. But for the first time in a long time, I had hope. The silence in the room stretched on for what felt like forever. People were still staring, unsure whether to pretend they hadn't just witnessed the most dramatic moment in the club's history or lean in for more. Some guests whispered among themselves. Others stood frozen, drinks in hand, eyes darting between Michael and me like they were watching the final act of a Shakespearean tragedy. Michael was still gripping the papers, his knuckles white. His chest rose and fell with each heavy breath. For a moment, I wondered if he'd collapse under the weight of it all. I took a small step forward. "Michael," I said, keeping my voice calm, steady. "Let's get out of here." His eyes flicked to mine, raw with something I couldn't quite name, grief, anger, exhaustion, maybe all three. He hesitated. Then, slowly, he nodded. We left the party together. Michael barely spoke on the drive to his house. He just stared out the window, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. I didn't push. By the time we pulled into his driveway, it was clear the shock was wearing off, making way for something sharper. Anger. Not the kind that flared up and burned out quickly, but the slow, simmering kind. The kind that came when you realized you'd been played for a fool for years. The house was too quiet when we stepped inside. Julia's things were everywhere, her designer shoes by the door, her expensive throw blankets draped across the couch, a half-empty glass of wine still sitting on the coffee table. Like she'd never expected to leave. Michael stood in the center of the living room, staring at it all. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "How long have you known?" I sighed. "A while." He turned to me sharply. "Then why didn't you tell me?" I met his gaze. "Would you have believed me?" His lips parted like he wanted to argue, but he stopped himself. He knew. Julia had been isolating him for years. Making sure he only saw what she wanted him to see. If I had come to him with accusations before, he would have defended her. Called me jealous. Told me I was overreacting. But now? Now, he had seen it with his own eyes. He exhaled through his nose, nodding to himself. "I should have known," he murmured. "I did know. I just didn't want to see it." I put a hand on his shoulder. "Then see it now." His jaw tightened. He nodded again. Yeah, I will." And he did. The next morning, Michael did what I never thought I'd see him do. He filed for divorce. Julia didn't go quietly. Of course, she didn't. She begged it first. Then she threatened. Then she cried to their friends, spinning some sob story about how I had always hated her, how I'd turned Michael against her, how I had ruined everything. But there was just one problem. She had spent so many years controlling the narrative, making sure Michael was the one who pushed people away, keeping his circle tight so that no one could question her. But now, Michael was talking. He told the truth. And people believed him. Because the evidence I'd handed him at the party? It wasn't just some vague accusation. It was everything. Every lie, every hidden bank transfer, every little scheme she had pulled over the years. And the best part? Michael had a damn good lawyer. Julia had expected to walk away with half of everything. She thought she'd leave the marriage with a cushy alimony check and the life of luxury she was used to. Instead, she got nothing. The prenup, one she had insisted wasn't necessary, came back to bite her. Michael, in his blind love for her, had offered to sign one years ago, convinced they'd never need it. Julia, believing she'd never leave him, had agreed. She had laughed about it back then, thinking it was pointless. She wasn't laughing now. She tried to fight it, of course. Dragged it through court, thinking she could manipulate her way into a better deal. But Michael wasn't that same man anymore. He didn't let her guilt him. He didn't let her cry her way out of it. In the end, she left with nothing. Not the house. Not the cars. Not the money. She had to start over. And from what I heard, starting over was hard when the entire town knew exactly who you really were. The final conversation. A few months after the divorce was finalized, Julia called me. I considered ignoring it. But curiosity got the better of me. When I answered, her voice was sharp. Are you happy now? I leaned back in my chair, letting out a small laugh. Oh, Julia. I wasn't the one who did this to you. She scoffed. You were waiting for this moment, weren't you? Just biding your time so you could swoop in and ruin my life. I smiled to myself. No, Julia. You ruined your life. I just made sure Michael finally saw it. Silence. Then, in a much smaller voice, she asked, do you think he'll ever forgive me? I thought about it for a long moment. No. I hung up. Michael and I weren't magically healed overnight. Years of damage didn't just disappear. But we worked on it. Slowly, for the first time in years, we had dinner together without Julia's presence hanging over us like a storm cloud. We talked. We laughed. He asked me about my life, really asked, not just polite small talk. And then, one night, as we sat on his back porch with a couple of beers, he turned to me and said, I'm sorry. I nodded. I know. He exhaled. I don't deserve how patient you've been. I shrugged. We've got time. And we did. Because for the first time in years, I had my brother back.
الغنوة اللي جاية دي حضراتكم هقولوها معايا يعني انتوا رغبتكم بس انتوا اول ما هتسمعوها هتعرفوا انما انا عايز اقول لكم هي كلمات مين هي كلمات الدكتور مدحت العدل والحان خالد حماد وتوزيعه برضه هنغنيها اول ما تسمعوا الدخول هتغنوا معانا على طول